Were you aware of the events leading up to the war? I mean, was there a sense that war was inevitable?
It was talked about, but of course we had no idea what war meant, and we weren't unduly worried about it. We just mentioned it here and there, but of course once it started, we got the full pelt of it in London, very badly bombed.
When did the war really start from your point of view? I mean, in terms of you experiencing or seeing war?
1940, a year after war was declared. 1940, it really started with a bang. And I remember saying starting with a bang, the air raid sirens were screeching out, and I was naturally in the bath. You're always in the bath when these things happen. And I was so scared, I thought, what's going to happen? What's happening? What does this mean? But it turned out to be a false alarm. I think they were practising.
Was there much preparation for war? Like, had you been drilled and so on? And
yes, we had what they called an Air Raid Warden, and air raid shelters were erected. One in Iveson Road, a few yards down from where we lived, in the cottages, and also, being 10 cottages in the row, we'd have 5 air raid shelters allocated to us. They were called Anderson shelters, which the ground, the bank, the hilly bank, was dug into quite a few feet deep, and we'd go down into the air raid shelter, which was corrugated iron contraption. And in the homes after that came the Morrison shelters. These were named after politicians, of course. Oh, yeah. Like streets are named after politicians. And they were very heavy iron, like a huge iron table. And my mother got so daring after we'd had, before the end of the war, when we had 5 years of it, you do get daring because you lose your sleep and you just have to sleep and you have to try and live a normal life. We still had to go to work and act just like everyday life. And my mother used to sleep under it, and then eventually she got so daring she just lay herself out right on top of it, the top. And across the windows we had blacked out with black paper, and they're the first things to go, the window panes, the glass window panes. And a lady down the road, she was standing in front of her mirror. I only knew her by sight. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror prior to going out. Bomb dropped, blinded her. She was standing in front of the mirror and she was blind for the rest of her days. And then we had what they called a Molotov cocktail bomb. And this was 5 sticks of gelignite and other concoctions to make the Molotov bomb. And you'd hear one in the distance and you'd say, oh, it's a Molotov cocktail, because gradually those 5 bombs, they gradually came nearer and nearer to you in many instances, and then we'd really get panicky. We'd dive under the kitchen table, and while you hear the bombs, you're still alive, naturally, but you don't hear the last one if it lands on you or on your house, because we weren't always indoors, we were often out in the street. And it landed just a few feet away from us. Opposite the cottages was a potato merchant. His name was Corkerton. And it landed right on top of that potato shed on the bank sidings. And nobody was there, fortunately. But we heard another day, when I was on the way home, lunch break, and we had a doodlebug, a V-bomb, as they called them, but doodlebug was the nickname for them, pilotless aircraft. And this particular doodlebug, this was the one that really scared me. I got outside in the street, walking up Iveson Road from Drons, and this blooming thing seemed to be following me. It was overhead, and I thought, this has my number on it, and this is the end of me. I want to get home and get with Mum. Vida was working in the city. I'll get home and get with Mum, and at least we'll die together. And as soon as I got to Mum's back gate, Mum came running. Of course she'd heard it, couldn't help but hear the damn thing. And we both heaved such a sigh of relief, because these pilotless aircraft, they'd suddenly spin round and go off in a different direction, and that's exactly what that one did. And you don't think of the other poor devils that were going to cop it. Yeah. And it did land on one of our customers of Dron's, a young couple. Well, they couldn't have been so young, but they had kids every year, sort of, when they were married in those days. There was nothing to prevent them. And they were killed outright, the whole family, in a house at Crickerwood, which was a twopenny bus ride away through Kilburn High Road, up Shoot Up Hill, and to Crickerwood. And that's the family that copped that very doodlebug that I was so relieved that it didn't land on Mum and myself.
Yeah, mate, yeah. And how did it change your daily routine?
Well, we didn't have any sleep. We always felt tired, but we were still trying to carry on as normal. And we were bombed out 3 times, and they all seemed, the main ones seemed to be dropped during the night, so it affected our sleep. We were all walking around like zombies after a few years of this.
Now, when you say you were bombed out 3 times, what does that mean?
Well, bombed out means that you have been bombed and you have to spend a night or 2 away in the air raid shelters. You'd have a suitcase prepared, and you'd always have a box or a cage for birds or a box for the cats to take them with you. You're allowed to do that. That's where the job of the Air Raid Warden, to come and blow the whistle after the air raid sergeant's gone and we're all ready for the bombing until the all clear was sounded, and he would come along, everybody out and down to the shelter, and he'd help us with our possessions. And one day Vida also had her bag packed like the rest of us. We just took just a few belongings, just an ordinary attaché case, not even a big suitcase. And she grabbed the birds and her books to read in the shelter. She left behind the suitcase with money, spare money in it, and clothing. But you get panicky. Naturally you get panicky.
I don't suppose you'd remember the name of the warden?
Mr. Sharwood. He had a club foot.
Gee.
Mr. Sharwood.
And so he was a local
Yes,
man.
a very good bloke. And he rescued our cats at one time, because we had 3 cats, but the one particular cat, I don't remember her name, but we kept one of the kittens and we called it NARPAC, which stood for the National Air Raid Precautions. I can't remember what the AC stood for, but the NAR for the NARPAC. See, I can remember that. And we were so grateful, we almost felt like kissing the man. And then another Air Raid Warden came along one day, and it was when the gas masks were to be issued later on in the war, not right at the beginning. And he came along with these gas masks, which we had to wear morning, noon and night. We had to have them near us, preferably on our bodies. We had a long strap to go over the shoulder, and a cardboard, a square, sort of, just a few inches, about 6 inches deep and 6 inches long and wide, I think. And in it would be those horrible rubber air masks. He came along. It was his job to go take them to the people. Everyone in London had to have them. And I don't know of anybody wearing them. And when he tried, I sat on the table, I remember, while he fitted it over my face. And at once I felt I couldn't breathe. I said, I'll never be able to use it. Never. And he said, if we're gassed, poison gas comes, you'll be pleased. You must. So to work, going to the pictures, anything we did, we always wore our gas masks. Didn't wear them, but carried them.
Carried them with you, yeah.
Yes.
What about precautions at work? Because you spent 8 hours or whatever at
Well, again,
work.
they did the blackouts. The blackout came, we weren't in the dark all the time, but didn't have the blackout paper up at the windows all the time. But when some people only used curtains, it wasn't a rule. You didn't have to do it, but for your own sake, you did whatever you preferred to do. Some people just drew heavy curtains. You mustn't even have a little chink of light showing, so all lights were put out.
But at work,
when the air raids were in progress.
Did Miss Dron tell you what to do in the event of an air raid? Were there air raids where you had to evacuate the studio? And
one day, the butcher next door, Mr. Hackney, he was a very nice bloke, and naturally he couldn't do business and that, And we said, thank God. We only had just a few cracks and that. It didn't affect us next door. But we knew the bomb had dropped somewhere around about because word soon spreads. And also, you know, by the sound, the amount of decibels, you know. And Mr. Ron would put up the shutters during the day when the air raids were in progress, which we normally did at night to guard the place, and then we'd take them down the next morning when we arrived. And we already had been drilled into what to do in the event of an air raid by these air raid wardens. They worked voluntarily, and they were very good. And they had told us, as soon as the air raid siren, at first we had to go down the road before our shelters were built for the one between two of the cottages. And we'd race just over outside the backyard, up on the hill, down into the air raid shelter. Well, one day we were doing that, as normal, and it was a young couple next door, and believe it or not, they'd taken their double bed down. It was just rather cramped. The double bed took the whole space up, and there they were in bed. There was no room for us. So, of course, we were a little bit, annoyed about that, to say the least, and we said we must have room between the two families.
Was this in Iverson Road, was it?
In Iverson Road, at the cottages, Barry. And so we overcame that little thing, but people did take liberties.
But I was wondering more about the situation at Drons. Were there any air raids while you were working?
Yes, there were air raids, sirens going, and we'd all stop work, and we'd get as low down as we could. We'd sit on the floor, sometimes lay on the floor, and we must, I know we're supposed to be a brave race and all that, but we let our pride down, and we were very, very frightened.
Yeah, you were saying about the air raids in the vicinity of your workplace.
Yes.
Was there anything else to add to that?
Not really. Those were the outstanding ones. I mean, we had to put up with it, and it got almost matter of fact. It was our daily routine. We expected to be bombed, and we'd hear of this person being injured or killed in the air raids, and the reporters would often come around, and the photographers on the staff of the papers, and especially the local rag, and they would report weekly. They'd have even a list of names of people who'd been injured or killed. Also, I was retouching also at Drons. I was jack of all trades there. And there was a manager, Mr. Keynes, Harold Keynes, and he had the job of taking over from Miss Dron when she was getting a bit past it with old age, before she retired, and he took over the firm. And he had the job of photographing some of the dead bodies laid out at the Finchley Road swimming bars where I had been taught swimming.
Jeez.
And he said to me one day, I thought, I hope I don't have to retouch or spot those. And I thought, well, they won't need all that processing done to them. It'll be just raw, just printed and developed as they were. And he said to me, Olive, he said, these negatives are for retouching, and gave me a pile to do for the next week or so. And I'd say, what about the dead bodies? I don't want... Look, he said, you're not going to see those. I won't have you even seeing them. But one day, my curiosity got the better of me, and I looked, and I thought, never again would I look. Just laid out the corpses in the swimming baths.
Were there any air raid shelters in the vicinity of Drons? Could you have gone into an actual shelter?
Well, there were some in Whittlesden, which was over the other side, the opposite side of the way we lived. So the main one is the Iverson Road one, at the top of Iverson Road, and the nearest to Drons, there was another one down at the bottom of Iverson Road, and Loveridge Road, and Maygrove Street. They were all in that vicinity. And Miss Dron, had she wanted to, I don't remember her ever using an air raid shelter.
Over the 5 years of the bombings, how frequent were they, would you say? How many bombings would there have been? Is that possible to roughly estimate?
Not possible, Barry, not possible. It was it was getting more and more frequent, But as I've said, we were already getting more and more used to them, but we still had that terror, I'm sure, written all over our faces. And then we got sort of philosophical about it. We'd say, oh, well, that one didn't have our name on it. When we'd hear the bombs and it didn't affect us, it just landed away from it, our houses or our places of work, or if we were walking the street. We said, well, that one wasn't meant for us. And we'd start to joke about it. But my sister, Vida, was, even though I was more nervous normally, she was more nervous than me during the air raids, believe it or not. She'd suddenly wake up and, come on, Olive, get up. We'd be in our twin beds trying to sleep. She'd say, the planes are on their way over. They're in France. They're over France. I think she only guessed they were, but on the other hand, perhaps she could hear them, but we used to say, oh, cut it out, And she said, come on, I'm going to sit on the stairs. So often at night time, if we didn't feel like going out to the shelter, we would sit on the stairs, which led to our bedroom and down to the front room. And Vida would be the first one to be sitting there. Then I'd join her, and Mum was the same. She was tired out and said, oh, I've got to sleep. Oh, well, if we're going to go that way, we'll go that way. And if that is our fate, well, so be it.
I suppose they would have bombed at night intentionally.
More at night to keep us from sleep. And we had many bombs. We had hundreds and hundreds. No idea. It would be interesting if we could find that out, how many bombs were dropped in London. And, of course, school children and young children prior to school age, their mothers often farewelled them to a safer spot, a country area. One of those country areas was Coventry, just outside of London. And, of course, Coventry Cathedral, and that was badly bombed. They heard about it, the enemy heard about it, so of course they made to bomb the places. So some of those mothers and fathers farewelled their children without knowing it for the final time.
Did you lose any neighbours or friends?
No, not actual neighbours. Of course, a lot of the men folk were out fighting at the war.
What about your brother Gus? Did he
join?
Or?
My brother Gus would not have gone, and he had suffered with tuberculosis and rheumatism it left him with, and a weak heart. Oh. So he was not fit to go. They didn't want him. He wasn't any good to them.
I'm wondering also about your own wartime duties, because civilians, even though they were in jobs, were given particular tasks, weren't they?
Yes, well, mine, you'll laugh at it because it wasn't a big job, but at least I did my little bit. And I used to put out the incendiary bombs. They were small bombs dropped which caused a small fire which could have developed into a big fire, but I had a stirrup pump given to me, and I wore pants, Oxford bags in those days, the only time I've ever worn long trousers, and they were so convenient to pull on quickly, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever time in the middle of the night. And I get out my stirrup pump and steel helmet to wear on the head, and I'd put one foot one side and one the other, and I get the 2 hands and pump water. It was just a little spray, really, from this stirrup pump, and put out the bombs. But I must admit I only did it 2 or 3 times. So I didn't really do much during the war years, but...
And would that be near the cottages, or...?
That was when living at the cottages, and little incendiary bombs were being dropped everywhere, and if they're dropped on grass, and... But we were worried more about the big bombs, naturally, the high explosives. One was a 500-pounder, and my mother was going to her usual job in Crediton Hill, about a 10-minute walk away from home, and the bomb had been dropped and it was unexploded, thank God. And before the people could come and detonate it, it was there. They were so busy, they were trying to stop the bombs from going off all over the place, so it was there for about a week. And Mum had to pass it on her way to work, but she was told it was guarded by an Air Raid Warden and roped off the area where it had dropped, and of course it made a deep crater. And the man used to say, "Oh, you can't go through here, lady. You've got to go round the long way," which meant about a 20-minute walk. And Mum was always in a hurry, never had time to spare. So she got so friendly with that particular Air Raid Warden, and when he wasn't there, she used to duck under the ropes, walk past the £500 unexploded bomb, which could have gone up any tick of the clock. But you get a sense of daring.
Can I just go back to your role? How would you know that the incendiary bombs had been dropped and needed being put out at that particular...
They'd be seen, the flames, the little flames.
So would someone report to you? Or?
The Air Raid Warden's job again. They were wonderful. They were civil defence. They said that I was in with the putting out the little incendiary bombs. That was civil defence.
Did that have a title, your role?
No, I was just... No particular title.
What about coping with the actual scenes of devastation? I mean, the image I have would be that there'd be a lot of rubble and buildings half demolished by bombs and so on. Is that accurate?
Definitely, very much so. And the rubble would stay there for weeks, months, years. And I think some of it was left for a good while, and maybe still there in some parts of England, to show tourists and leave it there as a reminder of what a horrible thing, what tragedies and what a horrible thing war is.
Were the cottages sort of surrounded by rubble or periodic?
Well, the main thing that happened to the cottages, with the weight of the bombs going off near us, we were shattered with glass. And I remember there was my sister and I, we didn't have a wardrobe, so our scanty dresses and things, we used to hang them on the back of the bedroom door. I had one hook, Vida had another. We had a few wooden coat hangers, and there was a great service that was, if your clothes, your few clothes, if they were pitted with glass, you could take them to the dry cleaner. They would get the glass out and they would dry clean them, and it was all done free of charge. But we had to take the railway to get to Swiss Cottage, where this dry cleaning establishment was set up. And Vida's one day, well, she had to throw some of the dresses out, because from those little windows, when they fragment, there's thousands of little pieces. But thank God it never went in our eyes or in our body.
What was the condition of the family on the outbreak of war, like in 1939, 1940? What was the situation? Gus was still living at home, was he?
My brother Gus had married and left home, of course. And Vida, my mother and myself, we were known as the three smart girls, because it was a normal thing to dress up on a Sunday and to dress up to go out. And then in those days, Mum used to come with us because we were all trying to live a normal life and the theatres were open. And we just tried to live a normal life, and we did to a certain degree. Because, as I said, we were all working. Mum was going out to work, doing her bit for this rich lady just a few doors along. She really was. She wasn't a title lady, but she was filthy rich. And when she died, she left Mum £1 a week in her will, which helped greatly. £1 English was a lot of money. But more or less, except for this terrible heartbreak of hearing about different people, and it was such a sad time, but we tried to keep our spirits up. And we got to the state we'd giggle at really nothing, like we did when we were very young children. Something very unhumorous really would tickle our fancy, and we'd laugh at it because we were so down-spirited. But you've got to keep the stiff English upper lip, and you keep going to the very end.